My name is Ulrica Hale. I am 42 years old, a crisis communication strategist who built a quiet reputation fixing the messes of powerful people. Ironically, I never realized how deeply I needed to clean up my own life until the night everything cracked. When my husband casually said, "My friends think you are not remarkable enough for me. They say I could do better," I simply replied, "Then go find better." I said it calmly, without a tremor, as if I were commenting on the weather. That same day, I quietly canceled our plans, the gifts, everything. 2 weeks later, at 5 a.m, his closest friend called me in tears. His voice was shaking as he said, "Please answer. Something happened tonight and it is about you." That was the moment my entire life shifted direction. Before we continue, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you want more stories about silent strength and starting over. Your support helps this channel reach more hearts, and it truly means a lot. I remember standing in our kitchen when Leonard said those words. The early evening light hit the stainless steel appliances, turning them cold and sharp. I had just finished wrapping a thoughtful gift for his upcoming milestone at work, a celebration I had planned meticulously. I had reserved his favorite restaurant, arranged a small gathering with the people he respected most, and even ordered a custom cake with a simple message. I was proud of him. I wanted him to feel seen. Instead, his words carved through me like ice. He leaned back in his chair, confident and relaxed, as if he was sharing a harmless joke. He did not notice the way my breath caught, or maybe he did and did not care. He continued scrolling through messages on his phone, laughing softly at something Brett had sent him. The dismissiveness hurt more than the statement itself. I felt something inside me settle. Not break, settle. As if a puzzle piece finally clicked into place after years of forcing it into the wrong corner. I walked to the counter and opened my planner. I canceled the restaurant reservation with a steady voice. I sent polite messages to the guests, saying that plans had changed. I placed the wrapped gift in the cabinet above the fridge. I moved quietly, efficiently, the way I handled crises for clients. Except this time, the crisis was my own life. Leonard barely looked up. He assumed I was sulking or being dramatic. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was shifting. Later that night, he told me he would stay with Brett for a few days to think. He expected tears, pleading, and a promise to improve. Instead, I simply said, "Before you go, there is something you should know." I did not raise my voice. I did not explain. I let the silence expand between us. It was the first time I realized silence could be power. He hesitated, confused. Then he left, closing the door behind him. I stood alone in the quiet apartment, holding the spare key to our home. I placed it on the table, then pulled it back toward me. That small motion felt like reclaiming something essential. And that was only the beginning. The morning after Leonard left, I sat in the kitchen where the air felt colder than any winter draft. The sun had not fully risen, yet the overhead light cast a harsh glow across the counters, making the chrome surfaces look sterile. The gift I had wrapped with such care the week before sat beside me on the table. The bow was still perfect, the paper still smooth. It looked like a symbol of a life that no longer fit. I rested my fingertips on it, then pulled my hand back as if it burned. The silence inside the apartment was heavy yet sharp. It pressed into my ribs like a reminder that everything familiar had shifted. I opened my laptop and navigated to the reservation system for the restaurant. My cursor hovered for a moment, but my breathing remained steady. I canceled the booking. The confirmation email appeared instantly, crisp and impersonal. Then I opened another tab and changed the flight dates I had arranged for a small getaway that was meant to be a surprise. The airline agent on the phone asked whether I was sure. My voice did not waver as I answered, "Yes, I was certain." I moved through each task without hesitation, canceling, deleting, rescheduling. The motions felt like scraping frost from glass, necessary, methodical, detached. The gift stayed on the table as I walked to the closet where we kept seasonal items and things we rarely used. I placed the gift on the highest shelf above a row of forgotten board games. As I closed the door, a thought rose in me with a sting. 8 years, and in the end, my worth was measured by bar talk. I felt the bitterness of it, but it did not consume me. Instead, it clarified something. I realized I had spent years shrinking myself to make Leonard feel taller. I had swallowed compliments to make room for his ego. I had rearranged my professional schedule to support his ambitions, yet he never paused to consider mine. The realization sat in my chest with the weight of a stone, yet there was also a thin thread of light running through it: awareness. Later that afternoon, Leonard returned briefly. He avoided my eyes as he stood in the doorway. He announced that he would stay at Brett's house for a few days to think. His tone suggested generosity, as if he were granting me space to reflect on how lucky I was. I watched him adjust the strap of his overnight bag, his hands fidgeting with the zipper. He waited for me to plead, to ask him to stay, to promise change or improvement. Instead, I looked directly at him and said, "Before you go, there is something you should know." I kept my voice calm, steady, almost gentle. His brows drew together, but I did not elaborate. I let the words sit between us. The silence became a wall he could not climb. He shifted his weight, cleared his throat, and then nodded awkwardly before walking out. The door clicked shut. The apartment seemed to inhale. I stood at the table again and placed the spare key in the center. The metal felt cool against my palm. For a second, I traced the worn edges where it had rubbed against other keys. Then, instead of leaving it in the open, I pulled it back toward me. The small motion sent a subtle spark through me. It felt like reclaiming space inside my own story. My hand closed around the key, and with that gesture, something in me reset. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a tide turning under the surface. The rest of the evening passed in stillness. I boiled water for tea, listening to the soft hum of the kettle. I sat at the kitchen table with the cup warming my hands. The chair across from me felt impossibly empty, yet the emptiness was not frightening. It was honest. I stared at the faint steam rising, thinking about the version of myself I had been. The woman who rearranged her personality to be easier. The woman who laughed at jokes that diminished her. The woman who applauded his smallest achievements while hiding her own. The woman who believed endurance was love. As I breathed in the quiet, I sensed that she was fading. Not dying, transforming. Night settled over the apartment. The city noise outside became muffled beneath the windows. I walked through each room, noticing details I had long ignored. The stack of framed certificates I never hung. The unopened box of business cards with my name alone, not attached to any firm. The notebook filled with ideas I had postponed. I realized how much of my life had been placed on pause. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and felt a pang of sorrow, yet it did not paralyze me. It reminded me that grief can coexist with awakening. When I returned to the kitchen, the gift still sat where I had left it earlier in the day. I placed my hand on it one more time and whispered to myself, not to Leonard, I am not measured by this. Then I turned off the light. The room fell into darkness except for the faint glow from the hallway. I walked to my office, a small room with a single desk and a window overlooking the street. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen lit up, casting a soft reflection across my face. I stared at the cursor blinking at the top of a blank document. For the first time, the blank space did not intimidate me. It felt like an invitation. The cold present had settled fully around me, yet in that stillness, something warm stirred. A beginning taking shape beneath the surface, steady and unstoppable. Sitting in my small office with the glow of the laptop screen warming my face, my mind drifted without warning to the day Leonard and I were married. The memory unfolded with surprising clarity, as if the cold present had loosened something long sealed. Our wedding was simple, held in a small garden behind an old chapel. There were no lavish decorations, no string quartet, no curated photographs. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh soil. My dress was borrowed from my cousin, and Leonard wore a suit that was a little too big at the shoulders. During the ceremony, his hands trembled as he reached for the ring. It slipped from his fingers and landed in the grass. Guests laughed softly as he knelt to find it. When he finally placed it on my hand, he whispered, "I will always see you." The words wrapped around me with warmth. I believed him without hesitation. His eyes held a sincerity that felt like a promise carved in stone. The memory shifted abruptly, and I was back in the present. I saw his face from the night before he left. His eyes did not meet mine. They wandered toward the door, toward his phone, toward anything that was not me. The contrast stung with a sharpness that felt newly discovered. I wondered when his gaze had stopped seeing me. Was it gradual, like erosion, or did it vanish all at once when the world started validating him more loudly than I did? I rubbed my hands together and felt a slow ache crawl into my chest, not from longing, but from recognition. I remembered the moment I received the letter offering me a full scholarship for an MBA program. It was a dream I had carried quietly for years. I showed Leonard the letter, excitement rising in my voice. He congratulated me, then paused, saying he had just been accepted into a prestigious design school. His excitement overshadowed mine. He said we could not both be in school at the same time and asked if I could postpone mine. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself love meant compromise. I declined the scholarship and took extra work to support us. I told no one. Later, when the bills piled up, I paid off his student loans. I cooked meals, worked nights, and covered rent while he chased creativity. I convinced myself it was shared ambition. But the ambition was never shared. It was mine funding him. We had a child during those years. I became the primary caregiver without discussion. I managed our home, our schedules, our finances. I handled doctor appointments, daycare forms, and grocery lists. I applied for the mortgage and signed for the condo in my name because his credit was still recovering from school debt. At the time, I saw it as a partnership. Looking back now, illuminated by the silence of the apartment, I saw it as a sacrifice layered so thinly that even I forgot it was there. No one knew that while I packed lunches and ironed shirts, I was also quietly working as a freelance public relations consultant. I crafted statements for executives who made public mistakes. I built reputations and fixed crises while keeping my own existence small. I typed with a baby monitor beside me and invoices hidden in folders labeled household receipts. When Marina reached out to collaborate, I hesitated. She saw talent in me that I never dared claim. Together, we built a small firm. At first, it was a side endeavor, something almost secret, but it grew. Clients returned. Referrals spread. We had late-night calls strategizing for people whose names appeared in headlines. The firm became real, substantial, profitable. Yet Leonard never asked where the extra money came from. He never asked why I stayed up late or why I upgraded my laptop. He assumed it was a coincidence. He assumed anything successful in our home belonged to him by default. As I sat in my office, I felt another wave of memory. I saw myself attending his exhibitions, cheering louder than anyone. I saw myself defending his work when critics dismissed it. I saw myself applauding him on social media while never mentioning my own accomplishments. I made myself small so he could feel large. The realization pressed against my ribs, but it did not crush me. It opened me up. I understood now that my love had been built on endurance rather than reciprocity. The hum of a passing car drifted through the window and brought me back fully to the present. I glanced toward the kitchen where the spare key rested in my drawer. I thought about the gift above the closet shelf and the canceled reservations. My heart beat steadily, not with panic, but with certainty. The flashbacks did not pull me backward. They framed the truth I had been unable to see. I had not lost Leonard. I had released the illusion of him, and in the quiet of that understanding, I felt something inside me rise, gentle yet undeniable. The memories settled like dust, and when I finally stood from my desk, the apartment felt different. Not warmer, but clearer. The next morning, I heard Leonard come in briefly to collect more of his things. His footsteps were familiar yet distant, as though he were a guest rather than the man I had once promised forever to. He moved around the bedroom, opening drawers and closing them again. I stayed in the living room, waiting, neither avoiding nor chasing the moment. When he walked out with his bag slung over his shoulder, he announced that he would stay at Brett's house longer than planned. He said he needed space to evaluate our marriage, as if the burden of reflection belonged only to him. I nodded, not in agreement but in acknowledgement. Then I said, "Before you go, there is something you should know." He paused, confused, expecting tears or a plea. Instead, I walked to my office and retrieved a folder from the locked drawer of my desk. I laid the documents on the dining table. The morning light landed on the polished wood, illuminating the embossed logo at the top of the first page. Leonard stepped closer, curiosity replacing confidence. I could see the moment he recognized the name of the crisis management firm. It was the same company he had heard mentioned in passing during news segments and industry discussions. The same company he assumed belonged to powerful men he admired from a distance. I watched his eyes narrow as he read further. The pages detailed a finalized acquisition. The firm had been purchased for $22.4 million. My ownership share was listed clearly, $13.3 million. My name appeared throughout the contract, not as an assistant or silent contributor, but as co-founder and principal architect of the company's growth. Leonard looked up at me, his face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, yet no words formed. For the first time in years, he seemed small, not because I diminished him, but because the truth stood taller than his assumptions. I held his gaze without anger. I did not need to raise my voice or justify anything. The silence between us carved its own line. I said, "You never asked what I was building." The sentence fell softly, yet it landed like a blade. Not violent, precise. He sat down without being invited. His hands gripped the edge of the table as though the surface might steady him. I could see the calculations running through his mind, the years of dismissive comments, the jokes made around friends, the belief that he was the star while I was the support act, the assumption that his potential defined the trajectory of our life. Now, faced with evidence that I had surpassed him quietly, he struggled to rearrange the narrative he had clung to. I watched the shift happen in his expression. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to something heavier, like shame. I felt no triumph. There was no satisfaction in watching him unravel. My heartbeat stayed steady, my breathing even. I was not proving anything. I was simply removing the veil he had placed over me. The truth existed whether he acknowledged it or not. He asked when it happened. I told him the timeline plainly. The freelance work, the partnership with Marina, the first major client, the expansion, the negotiation, the sale. He asked why I never told him. I replied, "You never asked." The quiet in the room deepened. He looked around the apartment as if seeing it for the first time, realizing that every piece of furniture, every bill paid, every milestone reached had been held up by a woman he believed was secondary. He leaned back in the chair, eyes unfocused, as though trying to locate a version of himself that could survive this truth. I picked up the contract pages and returned them to the folder. The gesture was calm, deliberate. I placed the folder back in my office, locking the drawer. When I returned, Leonard was still sitting at the table, staring at the place where the documents had been. He asked what this meant for us. I responded gently, "It means you never really saw me." The sentence did not rise in tone. It did not accuse. It simply described reality. He stood slowly, avoiding my eyes. He muttered something about needing time. He reached for the doorknob, then hesitated, as though expecting me to stop him. I remained still. The silence became an answer he could not negotiate with. He walked out, closing the door with a soft click. I exhaled, not in relief, but in recognition. The unspoken truth had taken shape. The cold present was no longer empty. It held clarity, and that clarity had its own weight, steady and undeniable. After Leonard left and the door closed behind him, the apartment felt still again. I stood for a moment, listening to the quiet, letting it settle. Eventually, I gathered a small bag of recycling and stepped into the hallway. The building was calm, with only the distant hum of an elevator descending. As I walked toward the collection room, I noticed Ruth, my elderly neighbor, standing by her door. She was holding a potted plant, adjusting the leaves with gentle care. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose twist, and her eyes carried the softness of someone who had lived enough years to understand more than she ever spoke aloud. She looked up as I approached. Her gaze lingered on my face longer than a polite greeting required. She had a way of seeing past expressions and into the spaces people tried to hide. "Long day," she said, her voice calm and steady. I nodded, unsure whether I could trust my voice not to shake. She stepped closer and placed the plant on a small table outside her door. "You carry something heavy," she added. It was not a question. I tried to smile, but it felt thin. She tilted her head the way someone does when they recognize a truth they once lived. "Come sit for a moment," she said, motioning to a wooden bench beside the window at the end of the hall. I hesitated, then followed her. We sat side by side, the afternoon light streaming through the glass and casting lines of warmth across the floor. Ruth folded her hands in her lap. "People think aging makes you invisible," she said. "The truth is, it makes you see more clearly." I turned toward her, surprised by how her words reached into the quiet ache inside my chest. She continued, "You have a light that you do not see. Do not let anyone dim it." The sentence settled between us, soft and powerful. I felt my throat tighten, not with sorrow, but with recognition. She had named something I had not been able to articulate even to myself. I asked gently, "How do you know?" She let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "Because I once gave my life to a man who believed my purpose was to hold up his world," she said. "I cooked, cleaned, managed everything, and he received the praise for having a stable home." Her eyes softened as she looked out the window. "For years, I believed diminishing myself was an act of love." She shook her head slowly. "It was an act of erasing." I leaned back against the wall, letting her words wash over me. I felt the echo of my own choices reflected in her story. She told me her husband had passed 5 years earlier. She said she mourned him, but she also mourned the version of herself she never allowed to bloom. Now she lived alone, tending plants, reading, joining a small poetry group, and walking to the market on Saturdays. Her life was quiet but peaceful. She described her days without regret, yet with a clarity that revealed how hard-won her serenity had been. She turned to me again. "You are too young to carry that kind of silence," she said. "Let it go before it becomes your shape." I felt something inside me shift, a subtle loosening, like the first crack in ice after a long freeze. I told her that Leonard had left to stay with a friend. She nodded as if she had expected that. I told her that he believed he needed time to evaluate our marriage. She looked at me with steady eyes and said, "When someone cannot see you, it does not matter how long they stare." A quiet laugh escaped me, small but real. She smiled, pleased not at my pain, but at my release. She reached out and touched my hand lightly, her fingers warm. "You are not lost," she said. "You are rediscovering." The hallway seemed to hold its breath. We sat together for a few more minutes, not speaking. The silence felt different than the silence in my apartment. This one carried companionship rather than absence. When I finally stood, she squeezed my hand once more and said, "When you walk back inside, take yourself with you, all of yourself." I nodded, understanding more than her words said. As I walked back to my door, I felt a steadiness forming beneath my ribs. Ruth did not rescue me. She reflected on me. She held up a mirror to the parts of myself I had allowed to fade. Her presence did not solve anything, yet it shifted everything. I stepped back into my apartment, carrying the quiet strength she had reminded me was mine. The light in the room felt less harsh than before. The air seemed easier to breathe. I closed the door gently, sensing the beginning of something I could not yet name, but was finally ready to feel. When I stepped back into the apartment after speaking with Ruth, the atmosphere felt shifted, as if someone had opened a window inside my chest. I walked toward my small office, drawn there without thinking. The room was dim, lit only by a single candle I had forgotten to blow out earlier. The soft flame flickered, casting a warm glow across the desk and the shelves. Shadows stretched long against the walls, creating a gentle stillness that invited reflection rather than fear. I sat down in the chair, letting the quiet wrap around me like a blanket. On the corner of the desk stood a framed photograph from our wedding day. In the picture, Leonard's hand hovered near mine, frozen in the moment, before he slipped the ring onto my finger. His smile was nervous, earnest. My eyes were filled with hope, unaware of the years ahead where that hope would bend itself to fit someone else's shape. I reached for the frame and held it in my hands, studying the image with a calm detachment. The glass felt cool beneath my fingertips, grounding me. I lit another candle, allowing the soft glow to spread further across the room. The light caught the edge of the wooden box onto the shelf beside me. It was small and simple, carved from walnut with a smooth finish. It held mementos I rarely opened. I pulled it down and set it on the desk. I say, Nandask, then opened the lid slowly. Inside were a few folded letters, a pressed flower from our early days, and a ribbon from the bouquet I once carried. The objects felt distant now, like artifacts from a life that no longer belonged to me. I placed the wedding photograph inside the box. As I did, an unmistakable clarity rose within me. I said softly, I had once been the foundation, but a foundation is not meant to be stepped on. The words came out steady, not bitter. They held truth rather than resentment. I closed the lid of the box gently, sealing the photograph inside. The gesture felt symbolic, not of erasure, but of transition. I was not discarding the past. I was placing it where it no longer controlled the present. My eyes drifted to the stack of documents on the desk. Contracts, correspondence, financial summaries, evidence of the company I had built in silence. The candlelight reflected off the embossed lettering, reminding me that my accomplishments were real, tangible, earned. For years, I told myself that my work was secondary, supplemental. Now I saw it clearly. I had not been in the background. I had been the architect. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself to simply feel the stillness. It was not empty. It was spacious. I thought of Leonard's reaction to the contract, the shock in his eyes, the collapse of certainty. Yet I felt no desire to punish or humiliate him. My awakening was not fueled by revenge. It was fueled by recognition of self. As the candle flame swayed gently, I remembered the plans I had canceled. The restaurant reservation, the table for his birthday celebration, the gathering of people who admired his charm and confidence. I had erased it all in silence, believing the moment had died along with his careless words. But now, a different idea has formed. A new purpose began to take shape, not sharp or vengeful, but deliberate. I stood and walked to the living room where my planner lay on the console table. I opened it to the date that had once been marked with anticipation. I looked at the restaurant's number and felt a calm certainty settle into place. I picked up my phone and dialed. When the host answered, I spoke with polite confidence, asking to reinstate the reservation. The host recognized my name and said they could accommodate the request. I thanked them and confirmed the time. My heartbeat remained steady. I was not planning a celebration for Leonard anymore. I was creating a moment where truth would stand in full light, a gathering where masks would slip without force, a setting where silence would speak louder than accusation. The birthday dinner would proceed, but it would no longer belong to him. It would belong to the unveiling of what had been unseen. I placed the phone down and looked around the apartment. The shadows felt softer. The air felt lighter. I returned to the office and blew out both candles, watching the smoke rise into the room like a quiet exhale. Then I placed the wooden box on the highest shelf, not hidden, but honored in its closure. As I left the room, I felt the shift within me fully settle. The awakening was not dramatic or loud. It was steady, like dawn spreading across a horizon. I walked through the hallway with a sense of presence I had not felt in years. The night wrapped around the apartment, but inside me, a new light had already begun to burn. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds in narrow strips, landing across the floor like quiet reminders that a new day had begun. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, feeling the steady calm that had taken root within me. The reservation was confirmed. The plan had shifted. The purpose was mine. As I sipped from the warm cup, my phone buzzed. It was Marina. She asked if she could stop by. I agreed, knowing that I owed her honesty about my intentions. She arrived 20 minutes later, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. She set her handbag on the counter and crossed her arms gently, studying my face. "I saw the updated contract filings last night," she said, "and I saw the news notice scheduled for release this week. Congratulations are in order, but something tells me you are not celebrating." I let out a small breath and gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. Her eyes narrowed slightly, the way they did when analyzing a crisis. "Tell me what is happening," she insisted. I explained the reservation, the dinner, the timing, the attendees, and the truth that had been hidden for years. She listened without interrupting, though her posture tightened. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and said, "You want to humiliate him." Her tone was not accusatory but observant, like she was testing the integrity of a structure before leaning against it. I shook my head gently. "No," I replied. "I want the truth to have a place to stand." She paced the kitchen, processing. "But everyone will see," she said. "The power shift will be obvious. His friends will witness it. His pride will crack in public." I nodded, acknowledging her point. "Yes," I said, "but I will not cause the crack. The truth already did. I am only allowing the room where it can be seen." She stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Are you sure this is not revenge?" I held her gaze, feeling the steadiness inside me. "Revenge seeks to wound," I said. "I am seeking clarity." She leaned back against the counter, arms still folded. "The world will have opinions," she warned. I smiled faintly. "The world always does," I answered. The silence that followed held weight. Marina softened, her voice lowering. "You supported him for years," she said. "You built quietly while he dismissed you. I understand why you want this moment, but you need to ask yourself whether it elevates you or ties you to his fall." Her words settled into the air between us, and I let them sit there. I thought about the gift stored above the closet shelf. I thought about the canceled flights, the spare key, the wooden box with the wedding photograph inside. I thought about the years of small silences that accumulated into something heavy. I thought about Ruth's voice saying I had light I did not see. "I'm not trying to destroy him," I said softly. "I am trying to stop disappearing." Marina's expression shifted, empathy replacing concern. "Then you must be careful," she replied. "Because disappearing and being invisible are not the same thing. One is a choice. The other is a wound." Her words pierced gently, like a needle stitching something closed. She asked if Leonard knew about the dinner. I told her he believed it was canceled. She raised an eyebrow. "So, he will walk in unprepared." I nodded. "Just as I lived unacknowledged." She sighed, torn between admiration and apprehension. "People will talk," she said again. I shrugged lightly. "Let them." She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Half the viewers would call this justice. The other half would call it cruel." I responded, "Both can exist at once." She sat down finally, resting her hands on the table. "Do you want me there?" she asked. I nodded. "Not as an accomplice," I said, "as my witness." She inhaled deeply, then nodded in return. "Then I will stand with you," she said. "But promise me something." I waited. "Promise me you will not apologize for taking up space." My chest tightened, not with pain, but with recognition. "I promise," I replied. We sat together in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the spaces between our thoughts. I knew some people would see me as justified. Others would call me cold. Some would say I should forgive quietly. Others would say I should have left long ago. The morality of the moment was not pristine or simple. It was layered, like sediment formed over years. Yet beneath all those layers was a single truth. I had the right to exist fully. As Marina stood to leave, she touched my shoulder gently. "Be ready," she said. "Moments like this change more than what people see. They change what you allow yourself to believe." I nodded, understanding. After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen again, listening to the quiet. The moral tension did not frighten me. It clarified me. I was no longer seeking permission to be seen. I was stepping into the light that had always been mine. The evening of the dinner arrived with a quiet sense of inevitability. I dressed slowly, choosing a simple black dress that rested comfortably against my skin. I did not add jewelry or elaborate makeup. I wanted to feel like myself, not the version of me I had learned to perform. When I stepped out of the apartment and into the cool night air, I felt the same calm I had carried since placing the wedding photograph into the wooden box. The city lights shimmered across the pavement as I walked toward the waiting car. The driver greeted me politely and opened the door. I sat back and watched the skyline pass by, each building a reminder that people reinvent themselves every day, often without announcement. When I entered the restaurant, the atmosphere embraced me with warm lighting and soft music. The space was elegant, with tall candles flickering in glass holders and polished silverware reflecting the glow. The staff recognized my reservation and led me to the private dining room I had booked weeks earlier. The room was set for a celebration, not ostentatious, but intentional. A long table draped with white linen, crystal glasses placed with precision, a subtle arrangement of flowers in muted tones. I stood for a moment, absorbing the scene. Guests began arriving shortly after. Leonard's friends walked in with relaxed confidence, unaware of the shift unfolding around them. They greeted each other with familiar laughter and gentle boasting, discussing new business ventures, networking opportunities, and travel plans. When they noticed me, their expressions flickered with brief surprise. One of them said, "We thought the dinner was canceled." I smiled politely and replied, "Plans changed." They nodded, accepting the explanation without probing, as though the details did not concern them. They found their seats, filling the room with chatter. I stood near the window, listening without engaging. Marina arrived and joined me quietly, her presence grounding. She placed a supportive hand on my arm for a brief moment, then sat beside me. The door opened again, and Leonard entered. He looked around, startled to see the gathering. His confusion was visible, but he masked it quickly and greeted his friends. They clapped him on the back and praised him as though he were the reason for the evening. One of them raised a glass and said, "This is perfect timing. Leonard is finally about to live up to his full potential." Another nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Ulrica must be relieved. Now he can step into the life he deserves." Their words floated across the table like smoke. I remained silent, allowing their assumptions to settle. They spoke about him as though I were merely an accessory to his narrative, a placeholder until something better arrived. I listened with a quiet heart, no longer pierced by their blindness. Leonard sat across from me, avoiding my gaze. He looked uncomfortable, yet tried to maintain composure. His friends continued, unaware of the undercurrent running through the room. One leaned back and said, "Now that things are changing, everything will finally align for him." Another added, "This is just the beginning. Leonard was meant for more." Their voices merged into a chorus of misplaced confidence. I lifted my glass, offering a small, measured smile. The room grew still for a brief moment, sensing a shift they could not name. The waiter entered and asked if we were ready to begin the first course. I nodded, and plates were placed gracefully before each guest. The sound of utensils and soft conversation filled the room once more. As the meal progressed, I felt the moment approaching, not as a surge, but as a steady tide. When dessert was served, I reached into my bag and placed my laptop on the table. The metal surface caught the candlelight, reflecting a shimmer across the polished wood. The motion slowed in my awareness, each second stretching with intention. The room quieted as eyes turned toward me. I opened the laptop. The hinge moved smoothly, the screen rising like a curtain before a performance. Leonard watched with a mixture of confusion and dread. His friends leaned forward, sensing significance. The air thickened. Not with tension, but with anticipation. I did not speak. I allowed the gesture to speak for me. My fingers moved across the keyboard with deliberate calm, opening the document that held the public announcement of the company's sale. The figures appeared on the screen: the acquisition value, the share distribution. My name is listed as co-founder. Silence expanded across the room, slow and unbroken. I kept my expression soft, my breathing steady, my presence grounded. I did not look at Leonard first. I looked at the friends who had spoken so casually about my relief, my insignificance, my supposed gratitude for releasing him into a greater life. Then I lifted my eyes to him. The moment held, and the truth finally stood in the light. The silence inside the dining room stretched, thick and unbroken. Candlelight flickered against the screen of my laptop, illuminating the acquisition figures for everyone to see. No one spoke. Forks rested mid-air. Glasses remained untouched. Leonard stared at the numbers as if they were written in a language he had never learned. His friends exchanged glances, confusion turning slowly into recognition. I felt the shift, not loud or dramatic, but deep, like the floor beneath us had quietly changed shape. I clicked to the next file. An itemized invoice appeared, labeled as a studio expense. High-quality lighting equipment, sound panels, software licenses. The date aligned with the year Leonard had launched his photography phase, believing he was destined to be an artist. He had told his friends he paid for everything himself, yet the receipts carried my name, my account number, my signature. The room grew even quieter. I remained composed, my posture relaxed, as though I were presenting quarterly earnings rather than dismantling a narrative years in the making. I clicked again. A second document appeared, listing camera bodies, lenses, editing monitors, carrying cases, and insurance coverage. The total was substantial. One of Leonard's friends shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the realization settling into his expression. Leonard's face paled, his jaw tightening. He reached for his water glass, but his hand trembled slightly, and he set it back down without drinking. The waiter paused at the doorway, sensing the atmosphere had changed, then quietly withdrew. I transitioned to the next screen. Membership fees appeared, covering multiple years of professional guilds and networking associations. These were the same memberships Leonard had boasted about, claiming they recognized his talent and invited him to exclusive events. The receipts showed otherwise. My credit card had covered each renewal. My email address was the primary contact. His friends stared at the screen, struggling to reconcile the image of the man they admired with the evidence in front of them. I clicked to the final set of documents. Rental payments for the studio space appeared in a clean, chronological list, month after month, paid on time, without interruption. My name appeared again as the leaseholder. The rent was not insignificant. I remembered the late nights I worked to ensure every payment cleared. I remembered cooking dinner quietly so he could focus. I remembered supporting him while he crafted stories about self-made ambition. Leonard's face was drained of color, his shoulders slumped, and the confidence that once carried him through every room vanished. He whispered, barely audible, "Why are you showing this?" I looked at him steadily, my voice calm and even. "I am not scoring points," I said. "I am showing the truth." The words rested in the center of the table like a stone dropped into still water. Not violent, not loud, simply undeniable. No one moved. One of his friends leaned back slowly, his expression shifting from admiration to discomfort. Another looked down at his plate, ashamed to have participated in conversations that erased me. Marina watched quietly beside me, her presence steady. Leonard searched my face for anger, spite, or triumph. He found none. That seemed to unsettle him most. He asked, louder this time, "Why now?" I shifted my hands gently and replied, "Because you built a story that did not include me, even when I was carrying its weight." He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. His friends shifted in their seats again, unsure whether to defend him, comfort him, or distance themselves. I kept my gaze soft. I was not attacking. I was revealing. Years of unseen labor, invisible contribution, and quiet sacrifice now stood openly in the room, illuminated by candlelight and pixels. I felt neither bitterness nor satisfaction, only clarity. Leonard pushed his chair back, the legs scraping softly against the floor. He looked around the room as if searching for a version of himself that could survive this moment. His friends avoided his eyes, each processing their own discomfort. He whispered, "I did not know." I nodded once. "You never asked." The sentence landed with gentle precision. The room remained silent, yet it pulsed with realization. I closed the laptop slowly, the sound of the hinge punctuating the moment like a quiet drumbeat. My breathing remained steady. My heartbeat is calm. I was not the woman who shrank to make others comfortable. Not anymore. A server entered cautiously, asking if anyone wanted coffee or tea. No one answered. The air felt suspended, as though the room itself was holding its breath. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I looked at Leonard one final time, not with anger, but with truth. The power had shifted, not because I took it, but because I stopped giving it away. Then I sat back down, serene and unshaken, while the room struggled to rearrange its understanding of who I truly was. The silence in the dining room lingered like a held breath, and I could feel the weight of every gaze shifting in the space around me. Leonard sat rigid, his shoulders rounded inward as though bracing against a cold wind only he could feel. His friends no longer looked certain of their allegiance. Some stared at the tablecloth, others pretended to study their glasses, and a few watched me with an expression I had never seen directed toward me before. Recognition. It was as if they were finally seeing a person who had been sitting among them for years without being acknowledged. Then, unexpectedly, the door opened. Ruth stepped inside, holding her purse in one hand and standing with quiet dignity. I had invited her, though she had not confirmed whether she would come. Her presence changed the temperature of the room. Conversation stopped entirely. She walked toward the table with graceful certainty and took an empty seat. She placed her purse gently beside her and looked directly at me with a soft nod, as though saying she understood everything without a word exchanged. The waiter approached to ask if she would like something to drink. She lifted her hand politely and requested a small glass of sparkling water. When it arrived, she held it with delicate steadiness. Then she rose slowly, commanding the room without raising her voice. She lifted her glass slightly and said, "To the women who have been the foundation, but were never given a name." Her words did not tremble. They resonated. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence carried reverence instead of shock. Her toast was simple, yet it struck with the force of truth. I felt my breath catch, not from pain, but from validation. Ruth continued, "To the women who carried weight, they were told was light. To the women who were present, even when they were unseen. To the women rediscovering their own reflection." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes steady and warm. "And to you, my dear, for stepping into your own light." A few guests lifted their glasses hesitantly. Others followed as though unsure whether they had earned the right to join. Leonard did not raise his glass. He stared at the table, his expression strained. His friends looked at him, then at Ruth, then at me. The hierarchy that once defined the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. The air pulsed with a new alignment. Then another voice broke the silence. Harper, one of Leonard's acquaintances, leaned forward. She was a respected architect known for her precision and understated elegance. She set down her glass and cleared her throat gently. "If Ulrica ever needs a designer for a new office," she said, "she should call me. I would be honored." Her tone was sincere, not performative. She looked at me, not at Leonard, signaling her allegiance clearly. A ripple moved through the room. This was more than a compliment. It was a public repositioning, a recalibration of respect. Harper added, "Women who build deserve spaces that reflect their strength." The statement landed with quiet power. Leonard shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. I could feel the room recalculating itself around me. A social power shift was unfolding, not through humiliation or confrontation, but through recognition. I felt grounded, centered. I nodded to Harper with gratitude. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. "I will keep that in mind." She smiled, a subtle expression of solidarity. Ruth resumed her seat, and the room breathed again. The servers began pouring fresh water and refilling glasses with measured sensitivity, sensing that something meaningful had just taken place. The atmosphere softened, yet remained charged with awareness. Conversations resumed quietly, no longer orbiting around Leonard. The guests looked at me with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and reconsideration. Leonard finally spoke, his voice strained. "So, everyone is taking her side now?" he asked. His tone carried accusation but no conviction. Ruth looked at him gently and said, "There are no sides when truth stands in the center." Her words were neither harsh nor forgiving. They were simply true. He looked around the table, hoping for rescue, but none came. The friends who once fed his ego now avoided his eyes. The room had chosen its gravity, and it was not him. I felt no triumph, only release. I folded my hands in my lap and breathed in slowly. The moment was not about his fall, it was about my rise. Ruth reached over and touched my wrist lightly, grounding me once more. Harper lifted her glass a second time quietly in my direction. I nodded in acknowledgement. I felt seen, fully. Finally, the evening continued, but everything had changed. The power had shifted, not through force, but through truth, given space to stand. The dinner ended gradually, not with applause or ceremony, but with a softened hum of shifting awareness. Guests left in small clusters, speaking in quieter tones than when they arrived. Harper squeezed my hand before stepping out into the hallway. Ruth kissed my cheek and told me to sleep with the windows of my spirit open. Even the servers looked at me differently as they cleared the final glasses. Leonard remained seated, until the room emptied, as though rising would make the moment more real. When he finally stood, he avoided my gaze and left without a word. I did not follow. I did not watch him go. I simply breathed. By the time I returned home, the city had fallen into its late-night hush. I placed my bag on the table and slipped out of my shoes. The apartment felt calmer than it ever had before. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, letting my mind drift through the evening. I was not replaying it for validation. I was absorbing it as confirmation. I lay down and closed my eyes. Sleep found me quickly, without restlessness, without longing, without fear. Sometime deep in the night, I stirred, sensing movement in the street below. A soft red light pulsed faintly against the curtains, then disappeared. I heard muted voices outside, but nothing alarming. I rolled to my other side and returned to sleep. When the morning arrived, it did not crash into me. It touched me gently. At exactly 5 o'clock, my phone rang. The sound cut through the stillness of the room, sharp but not jarring. I reached for it, expecting perhaps a calendar alert or a misdial. Instead, Brett's name appeared on the screen. His voice burst through when I answered. He was crying, his breath uneven, words tangled. He pleaded, "Please answer. Something happened and it is about you." The echo of the hook from weeks earlier flashed through my mind, not as a warning, but as a circle completing itself. I sat up, fully awake, gripping the phone. Brett tried to speak again, but emotion swallowed his words. I waited, letting him collect himself. Finally, he managed to say that Leonard's friends had seen the financial news alerts. The sale of the company had been published in the early edition of the Financial Journal, complete with my name, my title, and the valuation. Articles were already spreading online, highlighting the unexpected rise of an overlooked co-founder. Headlines carried phrases like quiet powerhouse, unseen strategist, and silent architect. Brett said that Leonard had woken in the guest room and found the articles shared in his group chat. The men who once fed his confidence had tagged him repeatedly, asking why he had never mentioned my success. Some sent stunned messages. Others apologized for past assumptions. A few simply withdrew, unsure what to say. Brett said Leonard tried to laugh it off, but something inside him cracked. He said Leonard sat down, then slid to the floor, his breathing uneven, his expression blank. Someone panicked and called emergency services. I listened in silence, processing each detail. Brett said, "He's not devastated because you left. He's devastated because the story he believed about himself fell apart." His words hung in the air. There was no triumph in me, no thrill, only understanding. Leonard had not lost a wife. He had lost the illusion that he stood above the world. His collapse was not about love, it was about identity. Through the window, I heard the distant sound of an ambulance turning onto another street. The siren was faint, then gone. The world outside continued its quiet morning rhythm. Sunrise pressed a pale glow into the sky. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, holding the phone loosely now. Brett's voice softened. "I thought you should know," he said. I thanked him, my tone calm, steady. He asked if I would go to the hospital. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the answer form without hesitation. "No," I said gently. "This is not my moment to carry." He exhaled shakily, perhaps understanding. We ended the call. I set the phone down and rose from the bed. I walked to the kitchen and made tea, the kettle humming with familiar warmth. Steam curled upward from the cup, carrying a quiet comfort. I sat at the table and looked out the window. The city was waking, unaware of the personal tectonic shift that had taken place. I did not feel cold. I did not feel guilt. I felt released. Leonard's unraveling did not belong to me. His journey was his own. Mine was unfolding in a different direction, one rooted in truth rather than erasure. The hook had paid off, not with spectacle, but with clarity. I sipped my tea slowly, allowing the morning light to wash over me. I was not waiting for news. I was not suspended in worry. I was present, settled, and quietly moving forward. The morning unfolded gently, and after finishing my tea, I walked to the living room and opened the curtains. Soft daylight spilled into the apartment, painting the walls with a muted calm. I stood for a moment, letting the warmth touch my face. The city outside was slowly awakening, cars beginning to hum along the street below, and a distant train releasing a low, steady rumble. I felt present in a way I had not experienced for years. Not suspended, not waiting, simply here. I moved to the window seat and sat down, drawing my knees slightly inward, wrapping my hands around the mug that still carried a trace of warmth. From this spot, I could see people walking dogs, a cyclist gliding smoothly through the intersection, and a woman holding a paper bag from the bakery on the corner. Life was continuing, unaware of the private ending that had unfolded silently within me. I inhaled deeply. The air smelled clean, like a beginning rather than an ending. My thoughts drifted inward with clarity rather than confusion. I reflected on the years I had spent bending myself to fit the contours of another person's expectations. I reflected on the moments when I believed silence was grace rather than erasure. I reflected on the slow shrinking of my voice until it became something even I struggled to hear. And then I reflected on the shift. The moment I placed the spare key back into my palm, the moment I opened the contract folder, the moment I lit the candle and placed the wedding photograph into the wooden box. Each moment was quiet, but each one was a declaration. I lifted my hand and looked at the ring on my finger. It rested there lightly, no longer carrying the weight of promise or memory. It had become simply an object, a circle of metal, no longer tethered to identity. I twisted it slowly, feeling the coolness against my skin. I remembered the day Leonard slipped it onto my finger, his hands trembling, his voice whispering that he would always see me. I remembered believing him. I did not resent that memory. I honored it as something that belonged to a younger version of myself who loved sincerely, without knowing she would someday need to love herself more. I stood and walked to my office. The wooden box sat on the highest shelf, waiting without urgency. I took it down carefully and carried it back to the living room. The lid opened with a soft sound, releasing the faint scent of aged paper and pressed petals. I looked at the contents briefly, recognizing the artifacts without feeling bound to them. Then, with steady fingers, I slid the ring from my hand. It released easily, without resistance, and rested in my palm. I placed it inside the box next to the wedding photograph. The gesture was gentle, deliberate. I was not throwing it away. I was placing it where it belonged. In the past, acknowledged but not defining. I closed the lid and the closure felt symbolic, not final. There was no dramatic flourish, no anger, no grief, only clarity. I stood and walked to the hallway, opening the closet door. I reached for the deepest shelf, placing the wooden box in the far corner where it would not be seen daily, yet would exist without shame or secrecy. I let my fingers rest briefly on the smooth lid before withdrawing my hand and closing the closet door. The soft click sounded like punctuation rather than goodbye. I walked back to the window and sat again, feeling space expand inside me. My mind quieted, leaving room for something new. I realized closure did not require destruction. It required placement, acknowledgement, release. I thought again about the ambulance lights from the night before, faint against the curtains. I thought about Brett's shaking voice. I thought about Leonard's collapse. Not from losing me, but from losing the version of himself he believed was untouchable. I felt neither responsibility nor satisfaction. His journey would unfold without me. Mine would unfold without him. Our stories had diverged long before either of us admitted it. I rested my head lightly against the wall and watched the sunlight grow brighter. I felt a calm that reached into my bones, steady and grounding. My life was not ending. It was widening, stretching into a horizon I had not been allowed to imagine. I whispered to myself, not as affirmation, but as realization, I am still here. The words settled warmly in my chest. The kettle clicked softly from the kitchen as it cooled. A bird landed briefly on the balcony railing outside the window, tilting its head as if assessing the morning. I watched it take flight again, swift and effortless. I smiled, letting the simplicity of the moment settle into me. I remained seated, breathing slowly, wrapped in a quiet that no longer felt empty. It felt earned. It felt like peace, forming its own shape. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and entirely my own. The apartment was quiet, but the quiet no longer echoed. It held space. It held possibility. I woke early each morning, made coffee, and sat at my desk, not because I needed to, but because I chose to. My work no longer hid in the margins of my life. It occupied the center, steady and unapologetic. Messages arrived from clients, journalists, and colleagues who had seen the financial announcement. Some congratulated me. Some expressed surprise. Some admitted they had never realized I was the one behind the firm's strategic brilliance. I responded with calm professionalism, not with the urge to prove myself. The proof already lived in the world. Marina and I met 2 days later in a sleek conference room overlooking the city skyline. She placed a stack of documents on the table and slid the top page toward me. It was a contract for our next venture, a new consultancy division designed to guide women leaders through public transitions. I read through the terms slowly, appreciating the clarity and respect embedded in every clause. When I reached the signature line, I picked up the pen. My hand did not tremble. I signed. Marina smiled, her eyes bright with satisfaction. She signed beside mine, sealing the partnership on equal footing, fully visible. Afterward, we toured the space that would become our new office. It occupied the top floor of a restored brick building with tall windows and sunlight that poured in like affirmation. The rooms were open, filled with possibility rather than furniture. As I walked through, I imagined quiet meetings, thoughtful strategy sessions, and women entering the space with uncertainty and leaving with steadiness. I imagined voices heard without interruption. I imagined decisions made without shrinking. The walls felt ready. While we walked, the elevator doors opened and Harper stepped out, holding a rolled blueprint under her arm. She had wasted no time. She greeted us warmly and unfurled the design plans across the central table. The blue lines traced a vision that reflected strength without severity, elegance without ostentation. Soft curves balanced clean angles. Private spaces coexisted with collaborative openness. She explained her choices, emphasizing light flow and autonomy. I listened, understanding that she had seen something in me that deserved shape. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "This office will reflect who you are now, not who you were required to be." The sentence struck with gentle accuracy. I nodded and felt gratitude bloom quietly inside me. We approved the plans and Harper gathered her materials, promising a timeline. That aligned with our launch. As she left, she touched my arm lightly and said, "You stepped into your own story. Most people never do." Her words lingered long after she disappeared down the hallway. Later that afternoon, I walked home rather than taking a cab. The city air carried a crisp freshness, and the sidewalks felt solid beneath my feet. When I reached the building, I looked up and saw Ruth standing on her balcony. She leaned against the railing, her posture relaxed, her expression serene. When she noticed me, she smiled, not widely, but with a knowing tenderness. I lifted my hand slightly in greeting. She nodded and called down softly, "You look lighter." I laughed gently, realizing it was true. I walked up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. When I reached my floor, Ruth stood in her doorway, waiting. She placed a hand over her heart and said, "Sometimes the greatest strength is walking without noise." The sentence wrapped itself around me like a ribbon of truth. I stepped closer and hugged her, feeling the warmth of shared understanding. She squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "You did not break. You expanded." I pulled back, my eyes bright, and thanked her not for advice, but for reflection. Inside my apartment, I opened the windows and let the breeze drift through the rooms. The curtains lifted and fell softly, like breathing. I sat at the kitchen table, feeling the calm settle deep within me. My journey was not about winning. It was about returning to myself. It was about remembering that presence does not require permission. It was about recognizing that healing does not always roar. Sometimes it moves like water, reshaping everything quietly. As evening arrived, I stood on the balcony and looked out over the city lights. I thought about the women who had been erased, minimized, or softened to make room for others. I thought about the women who had been foundations without being named. I thought about the women who were taught to equate silence with devotion. And I thought about the moment each woman realizes she can step into the fullness of her own life. The breeze brushed against my skin, carrying a gentle certainty. I whispered into the night, not as a statement but as an echo. Sometimes the greatest strength is walking without noise. The words floated outward, carried by the air. Before going inside, I spoke softly, as if to the unseen women listening from their own windows, their own kitchens, their own quiet awakenings. "If it were you," I said, "would you forgive?" The question did not require an answer. It invited reflection. It opened space. And in that space, my new chapter began.